Happy New Year, Jordan. Well, no, okay.
Hey,
I'm going to
thank
say that
you.
again because we're not going to be in New Year. We're going to be pushing this out quite a
Yeah,
ways.
yeah.
So,
Okay,
okay, let
that
me
sounds
start over. Jordan,
okay.
hello. Welcome to the podcast. We are so happy to have you on.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. This is great. I love it.
So, I've been following you for a while. And I think one of the things that strikes me the most is just how honest you are on social media. And so people feel like they know you. So I already feel like I know you, even though this is the first time we've been face to face, but I already feel like in so many ways I know you because you are so sincere and authentic there. Give me a little
Mm.
bit of backstory on how you got to that place where you were willing to do that.
Yeah, well, it's funny. It was totally an accident. But when I was starting everything that I was doing, it started in the storage closet of my sorority house, which is funny because I was actually starting with a small little Etsy store. And as that started to grow, I asked my sisters to help me package. I would literally like bribe them with free pizza. And I said, hey, I'll give you free pizza. Like we can go up to the storage closet. You can help me package. And so they would do that. And we would get into these conversations about life and experiences and dreams and struggles and what we were learning and how we were growing. We'd pray for each other. We'd laugh together. I mean, we really had this kind of goofy production going on the floor. Our butts would freeze because we were sitting on tile for like 4 hours straight together and talking about life. And there was just this, because there wasn't a huge group, it was a few people and it was like a safe place. We just shared a lot of life. And that kind of just started to translate into my brand. I would just, whatever we were posting that we had on the Etsy store on social media, I would share what I was learning. I would share a story or something funny that I learned from some of those conversations. And so it kind of happened super organically. I wasn't looking at it like, I'm going to come out and be super honest and be, it wasn't even really a thought. It was just, I'm sharing this because it's impacting me while I'm packaging your mugs and sending them to wherever you live. And so, eventually we shut that part of the shop or the business down for a little while, but that kind of just continued life growth experience, sharing advice, sharing honest stories. I saw how much that was making an impact when I was just doing it organically. So I continue to make that a staple of everything that I did.
So awesome. Okay, so how in the world did you start an Etsy shop in college? Like who does that? Most people are just trying to get through finals. What are you doing starting
Right.
an Etsy shop in college?
Right. I know, especially with a healthcare administration degree, right? Those totally go together. So I'm studying this, and I remember it was the end of my junior year, and I had gone for an interview for an internship that summer, and it was great. It went well. In many ways, it was flawless. There was a lot of potential there, but I remember leaving. It was for an insurance company or something, and I remember leaving feeling like, I don't think this is for me. But I'm about to go into my senior year, kind of late to change, and I just had one of those moments that pretty much everyone has of, what am I doing with my life? SOS, and not that anything was going wrong. It just didn't sit quite right. And I remember a few weeks after that, my mom had come down to visit me in college, and I just kind of shared with her. I said, Mom, I don't know if I can do this, and I know that's going to be disappointing. And she just looked at me. She goes, okay, so don't. Just try some stuff. And I was like, what kind of advice is that?
Stuff.
Yeah, but then she kind of expanded and said, you can still finish school and even take the internship, but maybe the reason it isn't settling so well with you is because you've been so driven, so on one path, only focused on getting straight A's and getting the internship, that you've missed out on a lot of other things in life and, trying some creative things. And so right around that same time, I had been dating my husband, he was my boyfriend at the time, and he had seen that I was doing some lettering, some calligraphy. It was very makeshift with a Sharpie marker, not that fancy. But I was doing that because I was trying to memorize quotes and Bible verses and even things that I was learning in class and wanted to memorize and remember, because when you really write it down and then it looks pretty, you're 10 times more likely to remember it. So he just made a comment. I don't even know if he really knew what Etsy was. He just knew it was something that you could sell stuff on. And he's like, you should start an Etsy store. I think that'd be a great creative outlet for you, because he was a D1 NCAA athlete and student, full-time athlete, full-time student, and he taught himself guitar. He had his creative outlet. So he suggested that because he's like, you're dean's list, you're running after internships, you're doing all this stuff. You need something that's fun and enjoyable for you. Well, I'm the personality type that I'm like, how can we strategize this? How can we make this work? You know, so all of a sudden it becomes like a small business when he's like, you just need a creative outlet. So now I'm taking 18 credit hours or 15 credit hours and running a small business and doing all this stuff my senior year. And we got engaged. So it was kind of nuts, and that lasted a little while. But yeah, it was one of those things that was, I want to try something creative, and then I liked it a lot. And so I just kind of ran with it, you know, and it was kind of a royal accident, but a really divine thing too in many ways.
So cool. Okay. So how did you meet your husband?
Well, Matt and I met because here's the funny thing. Tinder and all those apps came out shortly, not too long after we met, but we met a little bit because right around the time that Instagram was starting to be used on college campuses, we had connected because we had a lot of mutual friends. I had some friends on the football team. He was on the football team, but it was still like pre-following people you don't know, if that makes sense. Now that's so normal, but it was so early on that it was like creepy. You don't follow someone you don't know. But somehow, because I follow a lot of football players, I started noticing this guy would like my photos of whatever. I think I had like 12 followers at the time or 100 followers at the time. And I asked one of the guys on the football team that I was tutoring in economics, I said, who is this guy? He's like, oh, that's our long snapper. And I was like, what is a long snapper? I was like, okay, that's random. So long story short, at one point I asked him if we knew each other, and because he would go to like the campus ministry crew meetings I would go to. And so one day, after having this random stranger liking my photos that I kind of had seen, but didn't really know who he was, I was at crew, and we had such a big meeting because IU is a huge school.
What school is it?
Indiana University.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was on the bottom tier of this and he was above. And so, you know, I'm on the bottom half, and all of a sudden the MC of the whole meeting says, hey, Matt Dooley, great fumble recovery this past weekend in the game against Michigan State. And I'm like, Matt Dooley, why do I know that name? And then he says, hey, thanks. And now I'm like, okay, now I can't see this guy. He follows me on Instagram. I follow him. It was just this goofy, like we just kept crossing paths on campus, but never really shook hands and said we know each other. So that was why I finally said, have I met you, and should I know who you are? Because I feel bad if I don't. Long story short, no, we hadn't actually met. Then he said, well, I'll just walk over and meet you, because we realized he lived across the street. Oh. And I thought, heck no, that's weird. That's creepy. You're not like, I didn't think he was really going to come. I thought he was just flirting. Okay. So I'm sitting there post-workout, pretty much like I am right now, and shoving my face with chocolate chips, because what else do you do after a good workout? And sweaty, like just post-workout, sitting in the apartment with my roommates. And all of a sudden we heard a knock at the door. And we were like, oh my gosh, he actually came over. So that was kind of the initial meeting. And then he came in and we talked for about 4.5 hours that night, just connected on such a level that I had never connected. He always says it was like catching up with an old friend, even though we had never met. So that's how we met. And then that's actually how we proposed. He rang the doorbell and got down on one knee. So kind of funny. My dad lovingly nicknames him the door knocker. So yeah,
oh my gosh. I love it. Okay. So
that is cute.
Go ahead, Alex. Were you going to say
something? No, very cute and very appropriate for the open door sisterhood.
Yeah.
There you go. So far we've talked sisterhood and we've talked the door. So I think we're good.
We got it covered.
Got it all covered. Yep.
Well, Jordan, tell us a little background on your faith story.
Yeah. So I was raised in church, and then went away to a big, huge state school. And I was like, what is this? And my first year or so was just a lot of exploratory. Faith wasn't a priority. I mean, I'd still go to church on Sundays, but it was just one of those things that I did, you know? And then throughout my college years, being in a space that wasn't, I went to a private, faith-based school. So I was always kind of told the same thing. And so when I was exposed to such a different, diverse way of thinking, it really challenged me, I think in a really good way. But it also, I was able to kind of one day realize this isn't life-giving in some ways. There's something missing. Went through a kind of a hard breakup, started struggling with an eating disorder a little bit, just worked through a lot of that. And toward, I would say, kind of closer to the middle of college, was when I started exploring, kind of getting back into, I started going to Crew. Actually, it was a campus ministry that I started to go to toward, I would say, sometime throughout my sophomore year. And that definitely started I never knew how to read the Bible. I just was very religious about things, but didn't really understand just the personal element of it all. It just seemed like a bunch of roles, and I was bored of roles by the time I went to college, So going through those years and then being plugged into community slowly and connecting then with my husband, who even, challenged my thinking in some ways, which was great. I mean, I already knew that I was walking with God, but he really helped me kind of grow in some ways. It was really good. And having a family that was super supportive of that and just continued growth it was a process. It wasn't like an overnight, but I kind of left it a little bit and I went on my own way, and then coming back around after going through some things, losing someone I loved, in a hard way. My grandmother and I were very, very close. It wasn't like losing a distant relative. That happened right when I went to college. So my hurt and my anger made me kind of against God, I would say, in some ways. But then struggling with an eating disorder and going through a breakup and those things that all happened within a couple of years made me go, there's got to be more. That like I know that I have faith, but I just don't know how to make it tangible and real. So that was when my journey really began, and I began to really unpack it more and go, I need to understand this, not just accept it as fact because people have told me. The last couple of years of college were just spent growing and learning, and that's still the journey. But I had a couple different experiences just where the Lord showed me, this is how you're living. You're living with kind of a half in, like your door's kind of closed, like you're opening it enough to be like, I'm showing up to church on Sunday because I want to be a good person, I guess. But you're not really like being vulnerable. You're not opening your heart. And that's where a lot of that stuff towards the end of my college career, when I was sitting there on the floor with my sisters and we were talking through life and faith, and some of us shared the faith, some of us didn't. I had this totally different perspective at that point, and I saw the beauty and the growth that comes from vulnerability, from opening the door completely, not kind of like tucking yourself behind this door of put togetherness and then like stepping your foot out and being like, I'm good, So I just got this really neat kind of visual just from God of how I was really living, and he showed me little by little how to open up. And I think that was the biggest part. I think that's the biggest misconception about faith too, is that it's like, oh, here's a bunch of rules and like hide behind your door of perfection. When what I really learned and what kind of flipped my world upside down was like, actually open your door of imperfection and understand that that's where it begins. So I just had to kind of flip my whole perspective of the whole thing. And that took a lot of life experience in those years, a lot of fast growth, a few hard experiences, I would say, to kind of open me up to there's got to be more than me,
Well, and that is, I feel like, often God's way, right? Because he knows we won't come to him on our own often. It's through the hard that we go, okay, I can't do this on my own. I really do need you. And I see this way is empty and this way is life. And I really want life. And I really don't feel that right now. And so I think even though those things are so difficult to walk through, they often are the catalyst, aren't they?
Absolutely. I think one thing that I learned in that season, and that I'm continuing to learn, is that a lot of people will tell you to change your life. And I'm all on board with like, take action. I don't like passive faith or passive change or any of that. I just think we can sometimes get to that. But I think we have to look at it like, we don't have the power to change our lives. We have power to make changes in our life. But I think ultimately when God showed me like, I change you, and then the action you take as a result is what will make your life stronger and better and healthier. That was a huge mindset and perspective shift for me, because I thought, no, if I can just like get this A on this test and just work out enough and lose this much weight and nail all of these things and get that guy and all of that will be good. And I think that's what we constantly are striving for. And it's like, okay, yes, work hard. The action is important, but get that kind of initial part first. Like, okay, God changes your life, and then how you respond and the action you take is what will keep that change consistent, So that really helped me understand a lot more as to how to experience life to the full in the most tangible way. Because I think for me growing up, I always felt like faith was this like thing over here, this kind of over spiritualized. I don't know how to grasp that and make it mine. So even getting that piece and changing my perspective in that way helped so much.
What is your perspective on mentors? Did you have some mentors that helped you during that time, that helped you grow? Or what is your encouragement to young women?
Yeah, I would definitely say mentors have been a huge, huge key tool in my life. Everything from my mom being a mentor in my life, because that's certainly key. And I think sometimes young women and young girls can overlook that. I know I have. I'm a very independent mind. You know, I'm an Enneagram 8. I'm pretty sure I charge, I'm my independent way. And so I resist that naturally. But having that open relationship with my mom and going through those years was super helpful. But that freshman year, those early years, I kind of resisted all mentorship. I think I met with kind of a mentor type person once or twice the first year. And then I was like, this is lame. This is boring. Let's do something more fun. You know, that was honestly my mentality until I kind of hit a wall. And I was like, yep, this isn't going to work. So that's when I started towards the end of college pursuing more mentorship. And I had a gal that was a year or two ahead of me mentor me in a very kind of friend to friend way. And then again, trying to open back up to like mom, SOS, help. And then also towards the end of college, had some different women came into my life that were also serving as mentors and helped guide the direction of where I was taking everything that I was doing. And even premarital counseling type mentors, you know, those people in my life have been pivotal, not only in what I do from a career and like just work perspective and what I want to do to impact women, but also on my marriage, on my mental health, on my physical health, on all my decisions, on my faith. So I think having mentors, at least from my experience, has helped me be what I say, the kind of woman who can change the world is a girl who is rooted in faith and well-rounded in the way that she lives her life, meaning, you know, she doesn't live in this bubble or that bubble or behind this label or that label, but instead she's rooted in faith, and that allows her to be well-rounded in how she lives her life. And so mentors have been able to guide and sharpen me in really embracing that for myself, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So where did you come up with that? Is that your purpose statement for all that you do?
I don't know where I came up with that. That's a good question. I don't know if I guess that's kind of a purpose statement. It's just something that kind of came to my mind one day because I started thinking, you know, I think sometimes we can think either or. Like, I think sometimes if we have multi-interests, we can feel like...
We got a response.
Uh-oh. Hold on. Oh my gosh. That was somehow...
You're good.
That somehow came up on my phone. Alex was voxing me. Okay. Cut that.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Start over about, is that your purpose statement?
One day I was just thinking about, you know, I think sometimes I started to, I guess, observe this phenomenon or this kind of divide of, at least for someone like me, I'm very multi-passionate. I love talking about all sorts of things. I love talking about my faith, but I also just love talking about like stuff we would talk about on the floor, which wasn't always faith, you know? And so I'm like, how can we have this dialogue and this conversation with people who think like us and people who don't think like us? Because that was where I started. That was the space I started in. And how can we stay rooted in faith and stay honest to our convictions, but also understand and learn from a variety of different places? And I think that's how we best operate with trusting the Lord and walking in that. So I didn't really, you know, think too much about it. I was just like, yeah, if you can be rooted in faith and learn how to let that be drive everything that you do, and whether that's a variety of interests or a variety of conversations or a variety of people groups. Speaking of mentors, actually, that was actually spoken into me a little bit because I remember in college, I felt like, gosh, I'm on such a big state, you know, it's a big state secular school. It wasn't like a small private school. And I felt like most of my friends didn't really think the same way I did. And I thought that was bad. And to some degree, you know, I talked to a mentor about that, and they said, you have to think of your friendship like a wheel on a bike. Now, if you have all stewardship or all friends who influence you or like who don't think like you or believe like you, and that can be unhealthy because you could be influenced negatively, right? And so if you think of you in the center, or you and God at the center, and then you think of spokes on a bicycle, if one spoke is, you know, you've got your fellowship spoke and your stewardship spoke. So your fellowship is like the people that are rooted with you, who walk the same walk, who are believing with you, that sharpen you, that challenge you, that influence you for the better. That is your fellowship spoke. And then if you have some people in your stewardship spoke, it's not necessarily bad to have those, but you've got to kind of have a little bit of both, because if you're only over on one fellowship spoke, you're literally living in a bubble and you're not being challenged and you're not influencing anyone, right? But on the flip side, if all you're doing is being friends with people who don't think like you and they don't agree with you and they're constantly influencing you for the negative and challenging you, like they say, like, show me your friends and I'll show you your future, right? And it's true. And so finding that's why I say kind of well-rounded. You have to have some people that you can go and influence and that, you know, maybe bring a different perspective to the table, so long as you're rooted in what you know and you have people who support and challenge that too. So, or, you know, support and influence that too. So getting that perspective from a mentor helped me kind of make that my reality, even when it just came to relationships. So yeah, I guess those things kind of go together a bit.
Mm-hmm. It's great. It's great. Alex, I'm pausing because I don't want to talk over you.
No, I think what you're speaking to as well is confidence, really. When you're rooted in faith, you know who you are and you know what you believe. And then in confidence, you can be that well-rounded person. You can have a life that has lots of different aspects to it, living it out in a way that you feel comfortable with, as long as you have that support system. And that means going into places that other people might not, or going into conversations that other people might think are strange or awkward. But because you're rooted in faith, you can be confident in that and say, this is who I am, and I'm here and I'm ready to learn from you. And my roots are deep, so I know what I believe and I know where I find my truth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I truly think, you know, one thing God convicted me of early, especially because a lot of this started on the floor, like I said, with people who thought like me and people who didn't think like me. And what was so great was I really learned that we need to be confident enough to go into places people would think Jesus wouldn't go, right? So Jesus wouldn't go there. Actually, read the Bible, he probably did. You know, it doesn't mean he has to look like that, but he was rooted enough. And I think if we know our identity, we can go love the heck out of people where people would assume we wouldn't go because we're too pretty and righteous for that, right? So I never want to take that vibe. It's like I have to be so rooted that that's what drives authenticity. That's what drives honesty. That's what drives confidence. That's what creates all of those things where it's like, no, I don't actually just stay in my closet and read my Bible. I'm going to go in a place where you would think I wouldn't, because that's the point. You know, that's the whole point. And, you know, I want to come back, and you only stay rooted if you go back into those places and you retreat and you go into those groups. But I don't know. I just think sometimes there can be a lack of balance. I've observed. I think there's some polarity that happens in our world, and understandably, but I think we're called to be bridges, not living in bubbles, you know? So that's kind of the whole heart behind everything I do.
That's great. That's great, Jordan. And how do you discern where you're called? Because, girl, you got a lot going on. So how do you personally discern that?
A lot of help. Back to the mentors thing. And you know, it's a day by day thing. I think sometimes what can happen, at least what I've seen, is people live in boxes. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but I think sometimes women can put women in boxes. I think sometimes we can say, oh, that's pastor's wife, or oh, that's the girl who's not going to church, or oh, we like create, or whatever. And so my biggest thing has been, how do I constantly break out of boxes that people will try to put me in so that I can be the most fluid and obedient and willing to go and just show up where I'm supposed to go? So the biggest thing was, you know, for me, it's learning what voice do I have and how is that being used right now? And even if that goes against the grain in this way, or might go against the grain in that way, ultimately, am I showing up? Am I loving people? Am I staying rooted? And if the answer to all those things is yes, then it's, okay, now I can seek counsel on, is this a space I should walk into? Or is this something that I should take on? And even having my husband, who he's very observant, I'm very action oriented. So if I think it's a good idea, I'm probably going to do it unless I have like a little bit of bumpers. And so having even someone like him, who's very complimentary to me in my life, and as well as mentors, I'm able to have the ability to say, hey, what's your thought on this? You know, this could be perceived this way or that way, but here's the heart. This is what I'm thinking God's on, but is God on it? Can we think about this? And from a little bit different personality type, with understanding my heart for people, is able to say, yeah, I understand that. I think that's wise, you know, and can affirm or say, let's hold off. And so just even seeking counsel, I think, is something that we have Pinterest, we have Google, we seek way too much counsel from Google, I think. And so, you know, having those go-to people instead of Google, I mean, you can Google some stuff for sure, but you know, on big life decisions, or when you feel like there's a pressing on your heart to either go this direction or that direction, or speak into this space or move into this, whatever. And one thing too, in addition to having your go-to kind of circle of trusted people, has been, okay, hold on, always bring it back to the basics, because I think we can get caught up in, oh, this is the expectation. I have to be this person. I have to be this ministry leader or this teacher or this, fill in the blank. And probably several months ago, I had this just whole moment where I was like, God, what's happening? Because there's a lot of tugs. There's a lot of, I feel, expectations, because, you know, whether because of my faith or because of what I've done or whatever, what is this supposed to be? Mm-hmm. And what have you said okay on, and what have I forced? Which is hilarious, because you would think that if we're doing anything quote unquote for the Lord, it's good. But I think sometimes we forget, no, we just get to do stuff because of God. Like we don't have to do stuff for him. We get to do stuff because of him. And I think that perspective shift helped me. And he just always told me back to the basics. Back to the basics, Jay. Like, what voice do you have? Who did you start loving on in the beginning of all of this? And maybe how have you tried to force something because of perceived expectations? So now, whenever I'm doing something, I always have to ask myself that question. Is this from a place of overflow or a place of perceived expectations or obligation? That really helps. That makes just such a difference in how I'm able to discern a decision or a step or a piece of, taking action on anything. So yeah, counsel and asking those questions makes a huge difference.
So good. Oh, Jordan, I just love that. I love all of that. Okay. Talk to us about some of the different avenues that you do feel called to and that you are involved in right now, and just what your purpose is behind those.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I really feel the tug and the whole just space that I am really running in is speaking to girls and women in transitional seasons of life. And so that's I guess women are always in transition. I don't know if you're ever not in transition. However, I think there is a season of life where there's a few seasons in life, but what I really believe I can speak into being kind of in that space myself is those years from like 18 to 32, 20 to 30, the 20s, you are doing everything from graduating college, getting your first job, moving across the country, moving again because that job stunk, watching your friends get married, getting married yourself, trying to figure out your friends, trying to figure out your life. I mean, there's pressure from great Aunt Cheryl to figure it all out to you. Like, what are you doing with your life? I don't know. And so all those transitions, having your first baby, buying your first house, going to grad school. I mean, there's just so much growth and personal growth that happens there that I think that's where so many people feel so isolated. And even though we could say all day long in church, we know our identity, the isolation begins to take over. And so for me, it's like, I want to help women through those years of just massive growth in general, from a very honest friend-to-friend type perspective. And I want to always be sure that my faith is rooting anything that I'm saying. But I go back to, where did this all start? And it started speaking into girls' lives that were just friends of mine, not even intentionally, just as a friend, and sitting there eating ice cream with her and talking through the breakup and talking through the next big decision. And I think the more that we can speak just simple steps and understanding into those spaces, it makes people feel a little less isolated, which therefore makes them a little bit more equipped to live a more purposeful life and make more intentional choices, rather than falling off the rails and just going with whatever seems fine at the time because life is hard and they're alone and they're stressed or whatever. And so I've just found that that's a little bit of an underserved area. There's a lot of college, groups and organizations and even ministries, but then that post-grad years, it's like, where's the support for the wife that's been married 2 years that doesn't have kids yet? For the girl who's in those awkward in-between years, and like, I don't know what I'm doing. So I feel like that's a space that I've just recently been living in and even kind of a peer in myself. So I'm not coming at anything from I have this all figured out perspective. It's like, let's figure this out together because we need to do that together more. So.
And what mediums are best for you to do that in?
Honestly, the podcast has been a huge way to do that, because I feel like it's this neat way to hang out in someone's car with them every week, which is amazing. Having, community groups and networks. I have a network that a lot of girls get to be a part of. It's just a big open group. And it's, some people, share my faith and some people don't, but I want to talk about how to schedule stuff better, to, hey, help me, because I don't even know how to start reading the Bible, to, should I live with my boyfriend? Like all those questions that come up that people just ask and they want honest feedback on, from whether it's a faith perspective or not. And I love that because it gives me a space to open up a variety of perspectives, but allow everything to be rooted again. And so having the community online, which is amazing. That wasn't a thing.
Is that through Facebook, Jordan, or? A
lot of them have been through Facebook, but now we found a different medium. It's called Mighty Networks. That's what we've been trying. So we're seeing how that goes. You might have to cut that out if it's not a thing anymore by the time this launches. But as of now, honestly, that's been a really neat way, because people can organize by location. They can organize by topics they're interested in. So if they want to talk about growing in their faith, they can enter that group. If they want to talk about just practical fitness stuff, they can enter that group. But that all just kind of weaves together. And it's women in those transitional seasons. Every single girl that's come into that is anywhere from 19 to 30. And I love it. They're all like my friends, you know, and they get to be friends with each other because I found that there's a lot of mediums to be able to speak into people's lives through a podcast, through Instagram, through emails we send out, all those things, which is great. But I'm like, you know, I don't think the point of life is to stand on a stage and just have an audience. So if I can utilize that gift that I've been given to have a platform, to have reach, and then allow them to connect with each other, that's when everybody wins, right? So then it becomes more of a network and a community rather than like, oh, I'm going to call this my community, but you're all just kind of sitting there and watching me from afar. Mm-hmm. So I found that to be super effective. And then utilizing those platforms like emails and podcasts to, again, still reach. And it's really neat. So finding that combo has been fun.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting, this idea of that those in-between years from college to maybe getting married. And for different women, those years last different amounts of time, right? And often the longer it lasts, the harder the heartache a little bit. Part of it is that we as women have more choices than women ever have anywhere in the history of the world. And as far as what we do with our lives and with our careers and our education, and it's the burden almost of choice. And I felt it when I was in my early 20s. And I think it's just amplified compared to when Krista and I, 20 years ago, when we were in our early 20s. So how do you help women navigate choice when the options are just immense? And I think that's what feels so overwhelming. Like, I could move to Tanzania, or I could move to Chicago. Yeah. I can't really decide. I could apply to be a waitress, or I could go to graduate school. I can't really decide. Like, just the choices. And and we do like parameters, because parameters help us narrow our choices. So how do you help people maybe almost look for those parameters to help discern this is the path I want to start going down?
Yeah, I fully agree with you. I actually wrote this in my book, that sometimes we get stuck not because of a lack of opportunities, but because of an endless list of options. I mean, I remember when I went to college, even the woman was like, here's 700,000 majors to choose from, pick one. I'm like, one? What are you talking about? And then I didn't even go with that one with what I did with my life. So jokes on that. So one big thing that has been a resounding theme that I've kind of even discovered for myself, because like I said, I mean, over the course of the last several years, from the time that this started as an accidental Etsy shop in my sorority closet to then becoming an actual shop, then being shut down, then turning into speaking. Then I had a photography business in the middle of all that for some reason. And then that went away. It's like, actually, I've really tried. I mean, people have kind of been following the writing and the content, that I've just been evolving and learning what the voice really is. But the reality is there's been a lot of different things I've tried in the middle of all of it. And in that, I realized, I think the key isn't that, there's a certain roadmap as to how to find the perfect fit for you. I think that's where the pressure comes from, is this perceived notion that A, there's expectations, and B, I have to find this perfect fit for me. And if I don't, I won't live my purpose. Hold on, time out, back up. That's not true. And so, the biggest piece of encouragement and advice that I give anyone in that space is one thing I had to learn, which is you have to take the pressure off yourself to strike gold on the first try. If you can get through that mindset, that's going to help you just say, okay, yes, I have all these choices. I'm going to go with one. If it doesn't work out, great. There's other options. But I think what happens is there's that like paralysis, because it's this pressure to strike gold on try number one, because you want something impressive to share with great Aunt Cheryl at Thanksgiving, or, you want to find your box that, people can say, you're the business owner, or you're the dentist, or whatever. And it's like, of course it's hard to make a choice, especially when there's this smorgasbord of choices. But if we can say, instead of looking at this smorgasbord of choices as this burden and this stressful thing, I'm going to look at it like, okay, let me see if I can narrow down a few and then run with one. And if it stinks, it's like, well, then what could I add to it? And that was what was really sweet about what my mom told me back in college when she said, try stuff. She didn't say, okay, drop out of college and start a business. She said, alongside what you're currently doing, just try something new. And she was just suggesting a hobby, right? So she gave me freedom to explore and experiment a little bit without having the perfect plan, but also not neglecting responsibilities. And so I think that's kind of a good way to think of it. It doesn't mean you just quit your job tomorrow if you're unsatisfied and go chase something, because you're going to be eating ramen the next day, So like, We don't want to do that, but I think with this burden of choice that you're talking about, it's how can I shift my mindset to say, am I feeling that burden because I'm putting pressure on myself to strike gold on the first or second thing that I try? It takes time to find your lane, and that will constantly evolve. And I think remembering that life is a constant journey. It's not I arrived now that I found my perfect job. It's bringing purpose to those places. It's bringing intentionality to those spaces and saying, I'm going to be open to this evolving, but we're going to start here. And once we can get to that and take that pressure to strike gold off in the first try, it opens a lot of freedom, to try and just be intentional where we are.
Yeah. So talk to us about your writing. Is that how your writing evolved? Was you just started trying it?
Yeah. So I will say that I did write a story when I was 8 called Kim and Ben's Fair. It's all about how Kim and Ben were brother and sister, and they went to the fair and got a hot dog. It was great. End of story. So that's where my writing career began. Still have that book. I even was the illustrator. It was pretty great. But
the Indiana
I never
Fair.
set out. Yeah. Oh yeah. Never went out, never set out to write books, to be a writer, to be a content creator. And it's funny because I would say that the core of what I do is writing, but I'm so, I'm a content creator in such a way that I want it to feel like more like a conversation than a piece of content. And so that's where my writing has just evolved and taken shape and grown up with me, honestly. I mean, I started that at the end of my college career, completely on accident, just I'm sharing this and it seems to be resonating. Now, how can I refine it so it's clearer what I'm trying to say? Okay, that clear. I really believe in feedback. And so seeing, oh my gosh, this post went viral. Obviously, what about this is resonating? And how can I duplicate that? Not for the sake of virality, but because it's obviously impacting people, right? So that, again, just listening to what actually resonates has totally shaped what I share. And also my own experiences have shaped my voice, and just the whole authenticity thing. Are you going to write like you actually talk, or are you going to try to write like you're fancy? Because who can write like they're fancy? I don't know. I just can't do it. So it's like, if I don't sound like this in real life, I can't write it. So,
well, tell us about your book and about why this book, because you could have written on any number of things. So why this content?
Sure. Again, I think it goes back to looking at this generation and seeing the burden of choice, seeing the pressure to prove and somehow find the perfect plan all at one time. And I think that's always been a thing when you're in those developmental years, in your 20s and your early adulthood, trying to find your lane. But again, it is heightened in this generation. And I think we talk a lot about comparison. We talk a lot about not feeling good enough. And I'm like, we've heard all that before, but, and we also we're encouraged often to, in the church, find our calling, and in culture to chase our dream. Okay, great. What about for the girl who's sitting there like, hi, I don't know my dream. What do I do? Or the girl who's like, this word calling annoys me because I don't even know what that means or what that is, and I just don't think that concept of the pressure to prove, living into culture, family, your own church's expectations, and also this pressure to somehow find your dream and tackle it when you're like, I'm just trying to pay my rent and not have to, move back in with mom and dad. I felt like that was a really underserved area. And in my husband and I's own experience, I mean, he played professional football for a while. He played college football. And with the process of feeling the in and out and the up and down of the NFL experience and being right alongside that journey, meanwhile, trying to figure out, am I going to go with health administration? Am I going to doodle on mugs on Etsy? Like, am I doing photography? What are we doing? We moved so many times. There were so many changes. And I'm like, there's nothing out there. Everything out there is either telling me to chase my dreams, find my calling, and yada, yada. And honestly, we just need to pay rent and do something that we don't hate, and what if and when he stopped playing football, then it was this, now what do we do? And so I really wanted to speak into that concept of, we live into expectations when we feel like we have unfigured out dreams and aren't sure where to step. And how can we start shifting our perspective on this idea of, find your purpose? Once we went through that season, I thought, I don't think it was ever lost. We often thought, oh, it's once we make the football team, or once we get this book deal, or once we do fill in the blank, once we graduate, once we get married. And it's so funny because I was like, I think we treat purpose as if it's this thing that's lost. I think we treat our destiny in life as if it's this thing we have to like go after and discover once we check this box, and this box, even our calling, whatever word you want to put on it. And I started to look at it like, well, maybe if I can shift my perspective just in my own personal life to, it's not loss, it's actually the very thing that helps me get out of these kind of mental roadblocks of comparison or isolation or distraction or whatever the struggle is that makes me feel stuck. If I can use that as the power source that gets me out, rather than thinking these mental roadblocks are between me and my purpose, or these circumstances are between me and my purpose or my dreams, then maybe I'll actually be living my purpose before I land the dream job, before we make the football team, before we figure out our quote unquote dream. And that takes so much pressure off. So it's just this idea of, I think this generation, even when I was speaking on college campuses, the biggest struggle was anxiety. And again, it comes back to having so many options, so many expectations that you either perceive others have of you or that we put on ourselves. And then this pressure to somehow go after your dreams that you don't even know what they are. Those things together are a wicked combination, and add in some insecurities and a little bit of isolation in these transitional seasons of life, you're bound to feel lost, right? So I thought this is a space that isn't really being spoken into and being articulated like that. So let's talk about it. So that's the heart behind really what my book is tackling.
Yeah. Well, my goodness, I feel it. I mean, I can go back there so quickly, and not just for me, but for my husband too. As you know, when you're in your 20s and you're trying to figure it out, and you do have so many options and so many possibilities. And again, that it's a privilege. Not everybody around the world does. So
Absolutely.
To take that and say, okay, how can I not be overwhelmed by this? And
Absolutely.
what's the next step? And what's the next step? And how do we create some parameters together? If you're married, we were married young. How do we create some parameters together so that we know that this is okay? And this idea that there's just one lane, I think we get stuck in that, right? I mean, it's the whole thing around the purpose. What's your single purpose?
Right.
What? I'm sure God's like, could you just? I've made it clear.
Chill.
Yeah, well, He made it clear: love Him, love others. That's our purpose. So, I mean, I can do that as the grocery clerk down the street, or I can do it babysitting, or I could do it as the CEO. It doesn't really matter. Love God, love others. So, if that's my purpose, then I like what you said earlier. We get to do stuff because of God, not for Him. So if this is my purpose, then I get to do stuff because of Him, right? I get to love others.
There's that's such a mindset shift, because the pressure comes from, I've got to do this, whether you're thinking it's for God or it's for my parents or it's for whoever, we start to live into that. It's like, well, when we can take the pressure off that God isn't this force that's like, okay, I'm pushing you to do this. And it's like, yes, He's given us things to do and mission and all of that. But when we can look at it like, this is a privilege I just get to live into, regardless of my current title or label or circumstance, so much freedom, so much less pressure. It helps take off that perceived expectation. And not even for me being in a space of somewhat influence, it's learning, is this a perceived expectation that I'm living into, or is this just from a place of purpose? And if that purpose is really that dang simple, it's like, know God, make Him known, love the heck out of people, right? And that will translate into anything that I do. Then how can I do that from a very practical, intentional place? And I don't care what it is. It just, you can try a bazillion things and stop thinking of your purpose as the position you hold, and instead of what you bring to that position.
Well, and I really do think gratitude then holds hands with that as well, because if we're constantly feeling like we're failing and not living up, and we're constantly feeling like we're falling short, we're not thankful at all for what's in front of us, because it's not enough. And so then we will start to see life in that lens, as opposed to the lens of gratitude. Thank you, God, for this opportunity, for this location, for these people in my life. Well, that changes us when we start with that mindset, as opposed to the not enough and always failing mindset. It's completely different roads.
Absolutely. I always say gratitude over grumbling, because if you're grumbling, you're not grateful. So I always have to say, like, am I grumbling right now, and why? And then how can I shift that energy I'm investing into grumbling or quote unquote complaining into gratitude? Because then that just, it opens up everything, and it changes the why behind what I'm doing. It changes the motivation behind what I'm doing. It changes the joy that I experience. I think we rob ourselves of joy so much, because grumbling leads to comparison. Grumbling leads to inadequacy. Grumbling leads to fear. Grumbling leads to all of these things, because I think fear is often from a place of perceived inadequacy, right? So God is not enough. I'm not enough. This is not enough. We're all gonna die. It's like, okay, hold on. So I think that's 100% true. I fully
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah. Well, and that God is taking us on a journey. So in some ways, in just saying, thank you, God, for this step that I'm in right now, it's saying, I trust you to take me on the journey. And I'm only going to see this one step right now. But I mean, you sitting on that college, in that kitchen in that sorority house, you were just taking a step forward. You had no idea where your steps were leading, right? You were just, that was the step in that moment.
Yeah, I think sometimes I always say, the biggest steps often come from a series of really small decisions. It's just, I'm going to learn what packing peanuts are. Okay, I'm going to get some pizza and ask my friends to tell me. That didn't seem monumental, right? And then I got asked to speak because I was sharing my experiences online. And okay, I'll try that, And those were just small decisions that added up. And eventually small decisions become big wins when you're just like, okay, God, we're doing this together. Let's live this story,
Yeah.
So
cool, Jordan. Okay, well, we want to end our interview today on just a few fun things about you. So talk to us about some things in your everyday that you could not live without.
Absolutely. So I have this thing called an essentials basket in my bathroom, and I just keep my stuff organized because I started to find that all of my, whether it's products or cleaning products or whatever, they would begin to just get jumbled. And I felt like everything was chaos and clutter, but they were all things I used, some on occasion, some daily. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to make a really simple strategy, and I'm going to have an occasional basket and I'm going to have an essentials basket, because then every day I can pull my essentials basket out and everything I need from a daily basis is there. Now in the occasionals basket, like we'll have some strip lashes for like the special days, or some extra hairspray or whatever the thing is that I don't use regularly, but every now and then need. And so even just creating that system, I'm like, I don't think I could live without this now.
Okay,
It
so
creates so much more.
what is in the daily? What's in the daily essentials basket?
Okay, so we've got contact solution because I'm blind. And then just the few different hair products that I use out of the shower, my contact case, my favorite deodorant, my favorite perfume, my moisturizer, those things that I use every single time that I get ready. And then in the occasionals basket would be things like dry shampoo. I don't use that every single day, maybe once a week or something like that. So just dividing up those things rather than having all products in that place, and so just implementing that system into my house, just starting with what I use to get ready every day or every week, has been so helpful. So that's my kind of go-to system in one area of life.
It's brilliant. I absolutely love it. What does your container look like that you keep it in?
It's a very simple it's kind of like a wood wicker basket from, I think, Bed Bath & Beyond. So it's kind of cute. It's not like just a plastic bin, and they slide right underneath my cabinet. It's great.
I love it. That's
oh my gosh.
Perfect.
And it can be transferred to anything. I mean, it could be your closet, right? You like my clothes. These are my essentials. These are my dailies. I always wear these tennis shoes. Or I'm going to wear this at Christmas, so I'm putting it at the back of the closet. We sometimes default to that because the dailies move forward in whatever system. But if we're intentional about it, it's going to create some order.
It does. It kind of helps with that mind space that just everything feels cluttered. How can I implement systems and where just the practical things that I use every single day? I tried color coding my fridge. I actually love that. My husband makes fun of me because he's like, this is insane. So I don't do it every day. But just having those systems, even within a fridge, because I'm like, man, I don't know anyone. I mean, I know some people, but I just don't hear about organizing your fridge a lot, which is odd to me because I open that more than I open my closet because food, right? So I'm like, that's a space I visit often. I want it to be orderly.
I'm the same way.
Anyways.
I actually I'm kind of crazy about my refrigerator being organized. So
I appreciate that. Very few people say that. So
I am. It's like one of my things. Okay, Jordan, what about a favorite holiday tradition? You may be just creating them.
Yeah. Well, so every New Year's Eve, my family growing up, my mom would get those party poppers. You know what those are? Like they're kind of like you'd break them open and then you get the little fake little Christmas crown and stuff. And so,
they're English.
Crown you put on your head.
England is where they
Yes. Yep. And so we would always do that. And then on Christmas, my grandparents would always break bread. Like they would have the kind of, it kind of looks like a host, like a communion host. But we would all just break bread and we'd all have a piece and we'd share it with each other. So doing that on Christmas and then doing the party poppers on New Year's are two fun traditions my family does every year.
I like that, breaking bread. I've never heard of someone say that. I love that. That's really cool.
Every Christmas.
Okay. What about some go-to recipes that you make all the time?
So one of my favorites recently has been this. It's like a rainbow sweet potato salad. Not salad. It's like a kind of like a casserole, and it's got a lime crema sauce. It's got diced sweet potatoes, a little cilantro, some corns. I know my husband loves it, and then I usually put some grilled chicken in there for some protein. And it's so easy, so simple. It takes probably 20 minutes to prepare, maybe 30 if you're grilling chicken. But clean, healthy, super flavorful, and I love it because it's seasonally friendly, meaning it's great in the winter because it's got some potato and some meat, but it's also not super heavy, so it's a great fall or summer dish too. So we must have had that probably like 10 times in the last few months, and he loves it. He'll have me make the sauce for other dishes now because he loves it that much. So that's been awesome. A go-to, easy to make, but nutritious too.
So fun. And do you have like a certain person you follow that you love their recipes?
I wouldn't say I have just one, but I do have a friend that's a dietitian. And so she has sent me an email with some different recipes to try and even share with my girls in my network and online. And so having that resource has been really awesome, but I don't really have one specific, or two specific. I just kind of draw ideas from different people because I don't have a lot of food restrictions. I've really had to cut back on dairy and sugar for cystic acne reasons. But overall, I don't have like a whole lot of food allergies or anything. So because of that, I can draw from different sources and find different options. So
it's great. I would
imagine cooking for an NFL player has an interesting dynamic to it.
It does.
Volume and nutrition.
It does. I mean, he's not playing anymore, but I think he still appreciates a good meal. So, but you know what? He's a great cook as well. He actually intimidated when we got married. He's just great at putting flavors together. I'm like, I can make mac and cheese. Okay. I can follow a Pinterest recipe. He can just kind of do it from scratch off the top of his head, makes the best steak you'll ever have, makes really great recipes. And so when we first got married, I was like, can I be the wife? I'm just always cooking. I'm like, I want to do this for you, but it's going to be way worse than what you created. So over the years, in the last couple of years, I've definitely refined that skill, but he knows what he likes and he's a good chef. So it's kind of nice to trade off sometimes too.
That's awesome. Well, Jordan, we have absolutely loved having you on today, and you just keep changing the world because you truly are through what you're doing. So thank you for being that voice in the world.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. It's awesome. You guys are great.
Okay. We'll talk soon. Bye.
Bye.